What's up folks, welcome to Wasted Space, and today we're doing a quick revisit on Planet Nomads, because since I last had a look they've hit early access, and more importantly they've added survival, and as of today 0.7 patch has come out which adds more stuff to the survival mode, and some flora and fauna and so on to the world that should make things a bit more interesting, and also kind of a good time for a fresh look. So if you guys aren't familiar with it, I have done a couple of videos on this before, but we're talking a single player open world survival and construction game. One of these ones, a bit like Space Engineers, where you use blocks and prefabs and so on to build a base, build vehicles, structures to try and help you survive. The main element in Planet Nomads, however, being on the survival side of things. So I spent ages today kind of having a playthrough survival mode in its current iteration, seeing what it's like, and I figured why not summarise my experiences a bit and give you guys an idea of whether or not the game is worth looking into, especially as it's due to go on sale tomorrow, so might just be something you guys might want to look at. So Planet Nomad Survival is another one of these ones that runs on that cliche of you start off having crashed in an escape pod, which is getting a little old, but you can kind of understand why it starts like that. It's an easy way of establishing, hey, new planet, that's why you've not got anything, because you've just crashed, off you go. And the early game process is all about setting up shelter and some way of both feeding and hydrating yourself. And this need and kind of difficulty in keeping yourself in good health on an alien planet is kind of the driving force behind a lot of what happens in Planet Nomad Survival so far. You need to keep your character healthy in a way that goes quite a lot beyond what most of the other sort of construction sandbox sort of games do. So it becomes much more about harvesting berries, fruits, that sort of idea, trying to stay away from nutrient paste, which you can make quite cheaply out of biomass, but really doesn't do that much for your overall well-being, and get to the point where you're just about self-sustaining. But this is where you're dealing with statistics like exhaustion and dehydration. So you've got a whole survival side to this that involves a whole bunch of stats that aren't normally there. You're not just eating for the sake of fulfilling a little timer that says, oh, and now it's time to eat. You're eating because if you don't eat, then you start to get hungry, and the more hungry you are, the less efficient you become at doing various things. And so it actually kind of makes more sense in my mind than they normally do. But it's also an environment that is intrinsically hostile because it is an alien planet. You know, the very fauna that you're eating can poison you. That sort of idea, and one of the things they've added in the 0.7 patch was a series of different groups of animals that you can find out there with some interesting AI behavior where you've got, you actually have females, males, pack leaders, that sort of idea. They have lairs. I stumbled across one by mistake and then figured out that actually what I thought was cobalt is an animal lair when three of these massive things come charging in because I'm suddenly tearing apart their lair. And it doesn't just extend to the animals either. Some of the plant life about the place is kind of out to get you as well. You've got to harvest food from plants that have these sort of fireflies around them. It's the easiest way to spot which plants actually can be harvested, which adds to an interesting gameplay element where actually sometimes it's easier to find food at night because it's easier to spot these fireflies. But there's various different plants that will react in different ways to your approach, and to some extent some of the animal species seem to be connected to the plant life that's around as well, so you get near a certain plant and a certain animal will react quite poorly to that. There's these funny little fly bug things that I only encountered once, but definitely didn't seem to like the idea that I was going for harvesting this plant that was in the middle of them. Now I will admit, to some extent, I made a bit of a meal of my survival experience by not thinking through clearly and realising that actually if I wanted water, all I needed to do was dig down. So this has a water table and you can dig down into it, which makes complete sense, but in Wasted's addled brain it left me completely dehydrated in the middle of the night in a vehicle that I'd slapped together with no lights on it just because I needed the range, I thought, to go and find a lake. But it's one of those sort of games, I think, that while it's a shame it's only single player because these are always better shared, it's kind of a story generator. You're going to be going out, you're going to be exploring, it's very relaxing. Unlike using Eden Star as a comparison, because the two do feel quite similar in how they play. You've got the jetpack in both games, you've got point of view seems very similar, the multi-tool is quite similar, and yet the two play completely differently. Eden Star is quite intense and constantly under battering from things, and you relish the daytimes because it's your only chance to get materials. Whereas Planet Nomads, I was out for days at a time in my little buggy, just looking around, trying to find materials and so on. Which does lead me on to kind of a bit of a bugbear and at the same time the construction system, which I really quite like. It's, got lots of flexibility to it. There's a lot of prefab models, but you've also got access to sort of Space Engineers style just blocks as well, and the two will go together quite nicely. So it gives you lots of flexibility. They have messed with the available items in game since I last played. Some of them have gone, but they've also added in new ones, some kind of weird ones, like there's a winch now for pulling stuff around, which sort of works and sort of bugs out, kind of like you might expect. But it's cool to see these things coming in. There is a rotor in there, there is a hinge in there. So maybe there's some physics options down the line as well. And of course, it's one of these games that has like full voxel deformation, so it hasn't gone down the Eden Star route where you can't deform and fiddle with the terrain. The problem with this is, it's got one of these sort of progressive tech trees. So you're going through, as you build certain things, you get the ability to access the materials required to build the next thing up, and so on. Kind of a familiar approach, and one that works well. Unfortunately for me at least, and it might just be me being a colourblind idiot as usual, the ore around the world is coloured. Some of it can be found on the surface, and it has little boulders and rocks, and that's a really efficient way of mining. Like, they seem to be really mineral rich when you find those. Or you can dig underground and look for seams. The problem was, I was looking for aluminium, gold, cobalt, and there was one other one. Either way, I could not find these things for the life of me. I drove around for a good 2 hours just looking for that stuff. I tried digging under the ground, I tried looking at the bottom of lakes, I tried going to the top of hills, I tried hanging out near the dangerous animals. I could not find it. And I can only assume that that's probably because the whole thing's procedurally generated, so there's an RNG element to it. It'll be out there. The question is just where. But it did kind of put the brakes on my progression completely, where I just got to this point where I was like, well, I'm just looking for this one thing now. I'm not even 100% certain there's much you could do about that side of things, of course, with a procedural world, and the idea in this world is that you explore. There's a huge number of biomes, the world itself is massive, you can just keep on driving. I guess the idea is, because I couldn't find it, I should move on and go elsewhere, build myself a base, and a mobile base, and move on out. But at the same time, the stuff I was moving on to was kind of the last of the tiers currently available, block-wise, building-wise, in the game at the moment. So I was also starting to hit what I think is kind of the other limitation for now, and it's early access, so there's plenty of time to sort this side of things out, which is just there's not enough stuff. I could build a cool-looking base. I went into creative afterwards and stuck this together, and I think it looks really quite nice, and in theory it would be survival ready, whatever you want to call that. But I think this is about the extent of how far you'd want to go before you start repeating yourself, before the next goal isn't... There's not even much room to scale this up. It's just kind of, there you go, you've got it. Now go and do the same thing, but with multiple of them. Do the same thing, but have 5 greenhouses instead of 2. That sort of idea. So I really hope they expand on that side of things, because as a relaxing survival experience, I actually had a lot of fun. Especially for a game that's quite early, only been in early access for a short period of time. I know it's been available for a bit longer than that because of how their Kickstarter process worked and so on, but overall, it seems to be running okay. I had a bit of frame rate problems later on in my session as I'd been travelling around a lot, but nothing really terrible, nothing to report home about and say, woo, steer away. And otherwise, I had a lot of fun just looking around, exploring the environment and trying to build up my home base, travelling out from locations, marking new locations of interest, that sort of idea. My only concern now remains, can they sort of add enough stuff out and about to make that continue to be interesting, and can they add enough blocks to make your progression continue to be interesting without multiplayer? Or is it going to need multiplayer? And at the moment, as far as I'm aware, multiplayer is kind of one of those sort of, okay, if things go well, we'll try and add it scenarios, which often means the answer is no, it's not coming, because unless things do go really well, don't rely on that being a thing. Now, one thing I did come across that I thought was kind of interesting and maybe a hint as to where they could try and go in future with it, try and add some interest in the environment, was there was a wreck at one point. A little blip showed up on my map, and when I turned up, there was a crashed vehicle and like a little log from the person who'd crashed it and so on. And if the world can actually have Easter eggs and items and things out in there that you can reliably go and find, and I don't mean you go and find them in the same place or anything like that, I mean you just do know that there's going to be something out there, maybe cave systems and stuff like that, which is hard to do with a procedural world, but not impossible, then that is what's going to carry it regardless of the multiplayer thing. So yeah, there's my thoughts on Planet Nomads survival so far. I was certainly kind of enjoying myself in a sort of The Martian way, where I wasn't being pressured by external things so much as I was just trying to make my own little self-sustaining colony where I was going to be safe, which is kind of compelling, especially if it was going to have more to continue on to. So as I mentioned, Planet Nomads will be on sale over this weekend, so if it looks vaguely interesting, get in there. Do remember it's early access, so it's limited at the moment as to what you can do. There are some issues with it. There's bits and bobs that are missing. There is here and there some bugs, although I will admit my experience was generally not a buggy one. There were just the odd problem here and there. I was like, well, that could do with a little bit more polish. Of course, when you're buying into early access, do take into account that that's what you're getting. Unfinished game, and it may go great in future, or it may not evolve too much from where it currently sits. So that's always the risk you take. Hope you enjoyed this video, guys. If you did, please hit like. Really helps me in the channel out. If you didn't, dislike button's right next door. Hammer away on that by all means. And otherwise, thanks a lot for watching, folks. I'll catch you for the next one.
You are in a well-fed state.